think one of the things that comes out of today is it depends on, I guess it depends on the will of God, or as to where you are, where you're standing, as this firefighter pointed out to us earlier.
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify something Commissioner Carrick said, you were about 10 minutes past from when you were standing with several of the high-ranking officers who you lost, and then you went to Barclay Street. Have you thought about that 10-minute gap, how you were 10 minutes from being in a horrible situation?
I haven't had a chance to think about it yet.
But is that sort of accurate, that you would have been with them, 10 minutes earlier before the building collapsed?
Well, some of the people that we lost, we saw, like Father Judge and Chief Gansey, Bill Feehan. We saw them about 10 minutes before we went over to 75 Barclay Street. And as I talked to their families, and I explained to them that they were working very hard and they were working at what they love to do. And I'm sure their efforts will end up having saved other lives. And their families can be very proud of them. And we have, without any doubt, the best police department, the best fire department, the best police officers, the best fire officers, the best emergency workers of any place in the whole world. And although today's tragedy is going to be enormous, and there's no way to minimize it, if it weren't for them, this tragedy would be far worse. I mean, they executed brilliantly today. And I having watched it, and having been a recipient of their services because we had to get ourselves out, I can tell you that whatever the number of casualties, without our police department, our fire department, our EMS, and the kinds of people that we have, many of whom lost their lives, there would be double or triple the number of casualties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Clearly, these briefings are becoming more and more difficult for city officials to meet and greet with reporters there. Many of their colleagues, co-workers, and friends were indeed killed today or are feared missing tonight. Mayor Rudy Giuliani indicating that the city is now prepared for thousands and thousands of bodies, and throughout the day tomorrow as the daylight comes up, as you look at a nighttime picture of downtown Manhattan, that indeed may be the scenario. At this point tonight, more than 300 firemen feared dead and missing. 78 New York City police officers are missing as well. These were the first men and women to respond to the scene earlier today. Also in that briefing, indications now, nothing confirmed, but indications that some people in the basement of the World Trade Center may be using cell phones to call relatives outside the area. Nothing confirmed again, but rescuers are aware that there is a possibility that some people may be indeed on their telephone inside at this point. Also, another clarification, we reported about 30 minutes ago, a van had been pulled over outside of New York City. We now understand that 2 or 3 men are being held for questioning. But as for explosives on board that van, that has been denied by police officials there in the briefing we just heard. Again, we'll track it throughout the night. It is almost midnight East Coast time. This tragedy continues to unfold this evening. And with more in Washington, here's Wolf Blitzer again. Wolf.
Thank you, Bill. Raymond Kelly was the police commissioner in New York City during the first bombing at the World Trade Center complex in New York. He joins us now live from New York. Commissioner Kelly, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that you knew some of the men and perhaps women, law enforcement officials who were killed today.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Particularly Bill Feehan, who has been a member of the New York City Fire Department for over 40 years. Father Judge was a chaplain for well over 20 years. Both of them were just super people, and I've known other people who are missing as well. So it's just a terrible, heart-wrenching tragedy.
I know this must be an emotional, very sad moment for you, but share with us what's going through your mind.
Well, you know, it's something that I always think of in these tragedies is police officers and firefighters run into these buildings when the rest of the world is leaving and running out. You know, what makes these people that do that? I mean, they're just a unique breed. These numbers are just catastrophic. When we talk about the number of firemen and police officers that are missing, they know that they put their lives on the line every day, but nobody could envision casualty numbers like this. So it is just an unspeakable tragedy. And
now the investigation has begun. How does the police, how do other law enforcement authorities in New York begin such an investigation?
Well, there's an entity in New York called the Joint Terrorist Task Force. It's made up of New York City police investigators and FBI investigators and some other agencies as well. It's been in existence since 1980. It was the first Joint Terrorist Task Force created. That is the component that did the...
Commissioner
Yes.
Kelly, stand by one second. We've just received fresh video, new video of the first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. I want to show that to you and to our audience. Let's just watch. The first plane smashing into the World Trade Center. We've seen video throughout the day of the second plane that went into the World Trade Center. When you see that, Commissioner Kelly, when you see these horrific pictures that none of us can comprehend, how do you explain what this enormity of this tragedy was?
Well, you can't explain it. It is the enormity is just mind-boggling. I think we think in the abstract of terrorist attacks. But when you see this, when actually you see the film of Plane 1, Plane 2, and then the collapse of the buildings, I mean, the world witnessed this. Terrorist attacks often happen in the dark of night. But here, everybody throughout the world, the civilized world, has seen this. And it's just incredible.
And is it fair to assume, Commissioner Kelly, that life in New York City will never again be the same?
Well, I don't know. New Yorkers, Americans are pretty resilient, pretty tough. I think certainly for the short term, life is going to change significantly. But I hope it doesn't change too drastically, because then the terrorists have won. They've accomplished what they set out to do, and that is to significantly alter our way of life. So I think we have to certainly pay much more attention in the short term to security issues. It appears that security at the airports was obviously breached to get these hijackers on the aircraft. I think tomorrow you'll see that significantly strengthened throughout the country. I think life in New York, certainly below 14th Street for the foreseeable future, is going to be different. Tremendous cleanup that has to be done. There's no power in much of that area. There are gas leaks that are happening now. It's a dangerous environment. It is certainly for the foreseeable future going to change life in New York. I hope it's not permanent.
Raymond Kelly, the former commissioner, the police commissioner in New York City, thanks for joining us on this terrible night. Our Washington Bureau Chief Frank Cesno has been checking his sources. He has some additional information. Frank, what have you learned?
Well, Wolf, I've been talking with someone this evening who was very much in the middle of all of this, a government official who was very carefully briefed throughout the day. And what he makes clear with the additional information that he's providing is that the confusion and the chaos and the speed of these events unfolding today revealed a situation that remains really, truly breathtaking and incomprehensible, but that there are some leads. Let me tell you what this official said. First of all, on one of the planes that was hijacked, Wolf, and we don't know which one, there was a keyed microphone open, so there were sounds and some discussion and some noise in the background. Apparently this was that was heard. This official, who has been carefully briefed on this, describes what was heard as duress. And of course, investigators are going to be listening very closely to that. Secondly, this official says there is, quote, credible information and leads that are being developed and pursued that gives law enforcement a feeling of some degree of confidence that their investigation will move forward. It would not provide details. We've heard just a little while ago of some arrests in New Jersey. I can't tell you whether those pieces of information are related. Beyond that, some more information, again, as to the speed with which things occurred. There were 4 hijacked jetliners today, as we know. This official says there were no transponder codes indicating hijacking activity punched in on any of those planes. There's a 4-digit code, Wolf, that pilots can punch in, so it's almost a covert notification that a hijacking is underway. That did not happen in any of the cases today. This official says that at one point government officials today feared there were as many as 7 hijacked jetliners. Obviously, there turned out to be just 4, but 4 is way too many and has led to this terrible tragedy that we've witnessed here today. So, Wolf, the investigation continuing in rapid fire. This official says that a judgment will be made in the morning, looking very carefully at the airports and airspace across the country as to when air traffic in the U.S. Can resume.
Frank Sesno here in Washington. Thank you very much. Our Jeff Greenfield is standing by in New York with more. Jeff?
Thank you. We have heard for the last 13 or 14 hours that this is, in the worst sense, a historic day. We thought we ought to talk to 2 people to give us some historical context. From Washington, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer David McCullough is with us. David, you're with us here. How you do?
Yes, I am.
And here in New York, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David Halberstam. Mr. McCullough, this country has always considered itself blessed, protected by 2 oceans. In World War II, nothing happened here. Nobody was injured by bombs. When a strike like this happens, and it has happened in the past to Americans, does it do something to us, to our sense of who we are and how protected we are?
Well, it's almost certainly going to bring us closer together. It's going to make problems that we thought were of great importance seem less by far. We've never had violence of this kind happen on our home ground. War brought to our own home place this way since the Civil War. The Johnstown flood, the Galveston flood, 2 of the worst disasters in the country's history, will probably seem less than this when the awful toll is added up. I think it's really worse than Pearl Harbor because it was an attack on innocent civilians, not on a military target. The world is not at war, at least in the usual sense, as it was in 1941, when war was very much in the air, even if we weren't in it. And the scale of it all, and the fact that our own equipment, our own airplanes, our own citizens flying in those airplanes were used as human bombs against our own great structures, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Heroic New York, high-rise New York, was seen to collapse before our eyes, unimaginable. It's a treachery, it's a day of horror unlike anything we've ever experienced in our whole time as a nation.
And David Halberstam, that brings another point up. We've often talked, after the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the end of history, somebody called it in the book. We were only at a time when small events would move us.
No. New chapter in history. I mean, it was, the Cold War had its own fears, a bipolar world, but in some ways it was a safer world. I mean, it was more controlled. Now it's more fragmented, it's more volatile, and this is an act of war, and a kind of war to which we are sort of uniquely vulnerable because the magnetic field of our power and our intelligence is very frail as you get deeper into what is apparently the place of origin of this terrorism. So there's, how do we manifest our power, which is very real, in a place so far in distance? It's a very, you start the day numbed by it, and then the magnitude of what it means and how it changes life. A free and open society being challenged by this kind of terrorism to continue the freedom of movement and access, which is so elemental to the way we live.
And David McCullough, there have been times when we have been faced by war that we have, at least temporarily, given up some of our civil liberties. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the Civil War, the internment of the Japanese. Are we at a different point now in our history, or are we likely to respond in some measure by restricting our own freedom to get some more security?
Well, I really do think things will change after this. It's inevitable. This is a day that will change history. It will change it in some ways for the better, but I'm afraid that will also mean a curtailing, a trimming up, some maybe even a vitiating of the open society as we know it. And that's a sad time, but it's the reality. It stresses our vulnerability in a way that we've not experienced in our past as a nation. It happened here. Any of us could have been on those planes. Any of us could have been, and we all were, in a sense, going to work in those buildings this morning. And as David Halberstam just said, it's the accumulative effect of the day as it's progressed on all of us, on the whole country, so that tonight we really feel the weight when the Mayor Giuliani was talking and the Fire Commission talking.